I really want to appeal to people to use their critical thinking skills. The facilities that God has given us. I mean, the Bible says, test the spirits to see if they are from God. That means use critical thinking to determine, theological propositions. Well, the same thing is true about science. Use critical thinking. And a lot of people don't quite understand how science works. And a lot of what we read and people trying to have one of these alternate viewpoints they're trying to build a case for themselves, but that's not how science works. Science works by disproving the other side. And so if you believe the earth is flat, or if you think that the earth is the center of the universe, you got to determine what experiment could disprove your view and then go analyze the data from that experiment.
So for example, I could give you 100 suggestions that support my idea, but if you come up with one, just one, then the whole theory is invalidated.
Yes.
Day before first light, when the life of man is supposed traditionally to ebb lowest, the little world of Yucca Flat is pierced with chill, and even the last stars look coldly down from the black arch of sky. Yet there is a tension here that quickens every pulse. The blood is still on the bottle of experiment, so to speak, but just minutes from now it will be blasted off in blinding brightness, with the 20-second nuclear explosions to be made within the United States. The tension increases as the minutes tick. A reporter has been briefed and fettered into atomic physics and identification checks. Soon his body lies like the red wheel of a clock, wastefully we have left behind in Las Vegas 55 miles an hour. The mind is a jumble of disconnected information somewhere in the brain. It's some kind of
Science works by disproving the other side.
Well, I could give you 100 suggestions that support my idea, but if you come up with one, just one, then the whole theory is invalid.
Science works by disproving the other side.
Well, hopefully you get the picture. Curvature. Curvature. It's funny that they don't talk about curvature. This opening clip was from a recent video that came out last week by CMI, Creation Ministries International. Their website is creation.com. And very interesting how they do seem to be in more or less a full court press at this point. And they're just pulling out all the stops, right? They're just trying to... They are just desperate to put an end to this whole flat earth nonsense once and for all. And they wheel out this guy, Henry Richter, who worked on satellites and worked at JPL and knew Werner von Braun. And they talk about him being a Christian and how could he be a part of the conspiracy? He's a Christian. He basically daring you to call him a liar. And, and it's just, of course, full of all the typical ironic statements. Where it's like, indeed, it's disproving the other side. If you find one thing that's wrong with the other side's theory, then it's a problem. And the funny thing is that they think they've done that when they talk about southern stars and they talk about satellites and they talk about, we've landed on the moon, and unwilling to admit that the single issue of curvature drives a stake right through the heart of the entire heliocentric argument. Yeah, but yet they persist. And so, of course, I've been thinking about this for the last few days, and at first I was all keen to just jump up and refute every little foolish argument that they make, and make a serious rebuttal video. And but after a while, I think it just dawned on me that, like, why continue expending the energy, the time, and the effort to try and refute these types of men who are so entrenched in just a paradigm and a mentality that goes just even so much farther than just their repulsion at the idea that the Earth could actually not be a globe, and that NASA could lie, and that space is fake, and that everyone was deceived, and this man wasn't really building satellites that ever went into space, even if he was building what he thought were satellites and watching what he thought were satellites and saw them supposedly work. We all know he never flew up there and saw them himself in action, right? But try convincing these guys, right? We've just seen this across, the people who have dug in their heels are dug in. And it's not even just about cosmology. It's really not. And this is what I think, I don't know, coming to terms with, but, I'm just thinking about more lately, is that even if these guys were right, were totally right, and the flat Earth was a total psyop, and total nonsense, and unscientific, and just pure delusion as they imagine it is, right? And let's say they are right, and we're all living on a globe. It's like, even if you were right about the globe, you're still living on the wrong planet, if that makes sense. They don't even know what planet they're on, even if it was a planet, which it's not. But the bottom line is that if you can't even bring yourself to question things like NASA and the overall agenda behind it all, and how it ties into evolution, and it ties into the search for extraterrestrials, and ties into war, and the military-industrial complex, and the nuclear missile scare that went on for decades with the Cold War, and all the just agendas upon agendas, and how the whole thing, it just goes on and on. And yeah, it just all comes back to the bigger issue of them being terrified to believe that they could be in the midst of such a big C grand conspiracy, period. And that, to me, is even a far just more tragic reality than their rejection of, a cosmological truth. It's a historical, political, cultural, theological truth. It really, framework that they're just, that so many people just continue to stick their heads in the sand and just pretend like it's not really happening. And this has been increasingly impressed upon me just recently, as I've been thinking more about, the more I research about AI and all these developments that are just rapidly coming out, and the cryptocurrencies. And I know some people are probably sick of talking about it, but the more you really look into it, and the more I think we're seeing more people even realizing that this blockchain technology itself is just the logical next step. It's where everything in computing is going to go, not just these little cryptocurrencies that we talk about with Bitcoin and the rest. And not only that, but how the central banks in different countries are all working on rolling out their own cryptocurrencies, their own blockchain-based digital currencies. And once they start to do that, we're really sitting at the point where all they got to do is just let the dollar die. It's so precarious, and it has been for so long. All the different market bubbles, whether it's the housing market or the stock market or the bond market, or even the crypto market, is probably just contributing to the bubble, the collection of bubbles. At some point it could burst again, worse than 2008. And the fiat currency, petrodollar, could just become worthless overnight. And in which case, a lot of people foresee that being, when the lights go out and it just gets crazy and martial law and all that. And who knows, at least for a time. But the more I look into this, the more I see it really kind of being the threat, that being the fear. But in reality, the most of society just keeps trucking along, and all they got to do, we already have, the thing is because of how cryptocurrencies operate with email and it's just email and text and all the stuff that we're already using. So the infrastructure is in place. And, and a lot of people still want to believe that that cryptos could offer sort of a route of avoiding the central banking system, of avoiding a totalitarian absolute control system, have your own free economy. But to me, that's just living in denial of some very basic facts and basic realities. When you just think about it's at the end of the day, to really control the economy, you don't even need to see like exactly how many bitcoins or whatever are in everyone's e-wallet. All you need to do is control the real goods and resources that everybody wants to live in our modern society, that being the utilities, the gas, who owns the military, who owns the automobile production, who owns, real estate, it's like, so what if you have all your own untrackable digital currency? You still have to interact with an entire system that is controlled by who?
In short, I think that we're in line for one of the most drastic and draconian changes to the U.S. money system in history. It could be on a par with the creation of the Fed in 1913, or Roosevelt confiscating American citizens' gold in 1933. The U.S. at this point is a ticking time bomb from a financial, from an economic, from a sociological, from a political point of view. It's a very dangerous situation.
So, Doug, what do you actually see happening with the dollar?
My thought is this, that understanding that the dollar is as unstable as it is, at this point, the Fed might try to create an alternative, and an alternative that's more under their control than the dollar and actually out of the traditional banking system. What would happen if the Federal Reserve created a look-alike dollar? Let's call it the Fedcoin. Perhaps based on the same technology that Bitcoin is based on. This is the blockchain technology where every transaction can be tracked from the creation of the Bitcoin itself. I suspect the next stage on the part of the government, since they've tried quantitative easing, can't do that too much more after creating trillions and trillions of these paper dollars, which are going to come out of the financial system and into the retail system, exploding prices. Zero interest rates, negative interest rates, huge distortions. That's going to come to an end. What are they going to do next as we enter the trailing edge of the hurricane and everybody will say, do something, do something. Well, what can they do? They've used their two major tools so far. My guess is they're going to come up with a completely digital currency called the Fedcoin, which will actually act as a parallel alternative to the dollar. It'll have a lot of advantages from the government's point of view. And as much as people seem to like Bitcoin, the public may accept it to start with.
So, Doug, tell me about this Fedcoin. What's it going to look like? Is it going to replace the dollar?
Well, this is a conjecture on my part. It's not going to be physical to start with. It's not going to be paper in any way. It's going to be something that you're going to have on your smartphone. In Canada, they have something called Project Jasper, which is their own version of this. The Chinese have announced that they're planning on a blockchain type currency. The same thing. They've said that they want to see this happen as soon as possible. The British have made an announcement along these lines. This is the latest version of the $100 bill that I've got here.
Right.
But do you remember not so long ago it used to be a little round circle? I mean,
Yeah.
they keep changing the $100 bill. I think in the last 10 years, we've probably had 3 or 4 different $100 bills. Maybe this is getting the public used to the fact that these things can change a lot and quickly. The day is going to come when this isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
Pole, there's just a big ring of ice out there, and how far that ring goes, nobody knows, supposedly. So since there is no South Pole, no one's been there. Well, I've known people who have spent 6 months at the South Pole station we have, research station. I guess they've lied about it all, I suppose.
That's because they're part of the Illuminati.
Part of the conspiracy, yep. And of course, you have to believe that in this model, it's domed over with this dome with the stars and sun and moon on it. So you can't have any space travel. So NASA has lied about everything it's done. We've never landed on the moon. Never mind the fact that there are at least 2 Christians who walked on the moon, and there are numerous Christian astronauts who've orbited the Earth. They're all lying too.
That's right.
And of course, as a PhD astronomer, I'm in a position to know better, and so I must be lying as well. But, no one's made that claim about me yet. I suspect that's coming. But no one's at least come to me and said, yeah, you're part of the conspiracy too, and you're lying as well. The sheer volume of the amount of liars involved has to be incredible.
On top are Haeckel's fake drawings. Underneath are actual photographs of what he claimed he was drawing a picture of. Haeckel lied deliberately. His own university held a trial and convicted him in 1875. He said, I should feel utterly condemned, except hundreds of biologists lie under the same charge. Everybody else lies, so it's okay for me to lie too. Haeckel's biogenetic law is as dead as a doornail, folks. It's not true. It never was true. Proven wrong. 1875. It's not true. He was convicted of fraud. His own university held a trial and convicted one of their own professors of lying. But his drawings are still used in textbooks in your county tonight. Proven wrong 125 years ago.
Scientists line up overwhelmingly on one side of this issue. It would have to be an enormous conspiracy going on between scientists of all different disciplines in all different countries to have such a consensus. That doesn't move you?
No, not at all, because from a biblical perspective, I understand why the majority would not agree with the truth. Man is a sinner. Man is in rebellion against his creator.
All these scientists are sinners?
Well,
And so the bottom line is just that things are moving so quickly. It's just getting more and more real every day. That this whole thing about the mark of the beast, and whether it's microchips or whether it's exactly how it's going to look and how the rollout's going to happen, it could almost happen any day. It really could. And so many of us have friends and families, loved ones, and so many people that we know that just, yeah, sure, they laugh at flat Earth, and we try and figure out ways to get through to them and get them to take it seriously. But the bigger obstacle is getting them to really just even conceive that such a massive agenda could be going on, that is actually being orchestrated from the demonic realm, orchestrated by Satan himself. But of course, in even all of that being orchestrated in a prophetic sense, in a sovereign sense by God to fulfill his purposes, to bring forth the end, the end of history, as he foretold so many centuries ago. And here we are, and things just continue on, and there's no shortage of silly little things going on to distract ourselves with. And the simple fact is that I don't hear any of these Christian creation ministry dudes just talking about any of this. Can't even bring themselves to just even recognize a fraction of it. So, okay, fine. You can't stomach all this crazy movement that people would dare question the idea that we live on a ball. Can you question anything going on around you? That's what really matters ultimately, and that's why flat Earth, in a weird way, is a very useful litmus test or a very useful part of the equation in a sense. Because I don't know a lot of flat Earthers who just still believe in the Mickey Mouse fairy tale about Western society being this Christian legacy and how all the things that we have now, all this technology and democracy, and how all this is credited to the legacy of the Christian tradition, and all these things that these guys are still so beholden to in their minds, and they can't, and they remember being little boys and seeing the Apollo missions on TV, and all wrapped up into this big old cage of nostalgia that they refuse to let go of, refusing to entertain the idea that all of this is really building up towards something really rather horrific. And people in the West, whether it's the United States or Australia or so many different places, have a very hard time believing that so much of what they've invested in, and their parents and their grandparents, and all of these narratives that we've bought into for generations could all just be layers upon layers of propaganda propelling us towards a conclusion that is just so far beyond what they can even fathom.